is Tar Heel Talk, an in-depth look at the issues and people making news in North Carolina. Here's your host, Sonia Williams.
According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, as many as 1 in 4 children through the age 5 are at risk for a developmental delay or disability. The early identification is crucial and allows communities to intervene sooner, leading to more effective treatment during the preschool years. Well, on today's show, we'll take a closer look at early childhood development, from those developmental milestones to resources for families who need support. And joining me today is our expert on all of those things, Carol Miedema with CWM Consulting, Early Childhood Assessment and Advocacy. Carol, welcome to Tar Heel Talk.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Now, you have been an educator for 48 years now, so I can imagine you have seen quite a bit when it comes to children in the classroom, anxious parents, the gamut. Tell us a little bit about your career.
Thank you. I have, yes, a little over 40 years in the classroom, in administration. The classroom spanned anywhere from early childhood to middle school. Also, I've done administration, head of lower school. I've done assessment. As of late, I've really invested a lot of my time in assessment, especially of early childhood, which is birth until really 10, early childhood till 6. But
I want to go back to that statistic that I shared at the beginning of the show, in that 1 in 4 children through the age of 5 are at risk for developmental delay or disability. That seems like a lot of children.
It really does. It's a sad statistic, it really is. And I think we all need to, those of us who are involved in early childhood, really need to look at why. What are we doing that may contribute to developmental delays, as well as what aren't we doing that really enhance that particular age cohort group that really is the most very important cohort, because what happens in these early years are lifelong.
And I think that's important for parents to remember, and I know that you've put together some development information for parents, and the first one that you share is to talk, listen, and respond. What does that mean?
It's really, really important for parents of children to be present in their relationships with their children, to talk. You know, we have these screens now, we have these little iPhones and so on that have kind of distracted us adults, and also have been given to children, that have taken away from actual talk, actual verbalization, answering questions. And that's very, very important. We need to engage the child by looking into the child's eyes and getting their attention. You hear a lot of talk about kids not being focused, not having attention. Well, it starts at the very beginning, because parents have control of that. If they're the ones who are looking into the child's eyes and talking and responding and answering questions or elaborating on what they might be talking about.
And that's something parents should do from birth.
From birth.
Okay. And then the next point that you make is to read, point, and discuss.
Reading is an incredible vehicle for language development and for excitement in the world around them, in reading, learning more about the world. And from the very beginning, as you have a little an infant in your arms, to read stories, to talk about and point to different things that you might see in pictures, and draw the child's attention to that. And as they get older, expand on that sort of thing.
It sounds like that early communication is really crucial to a child's development.
And even if some parents will tell me, gosh, I'm working on my PhD, I really don't have the time set aside that I can read to my child. take one of your books that you're reading for your coursework and just read to the child. If it doesn't have pictures, it does have words, and you can animate words. If there's a word like big, you say big, or you kind of get the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And the next point is to use the 5 senses.
This is such an important thing that I think sometimes it's so basic we forget it. That is how we learn. We learn by seeing and hearing and touching and tasting and smelling. Think back about an experience you might have had years ago, and you happen to go back to a place and you smell it and you know, goodness, I remember back when. So all these senses play into a child learning about things. And this is how, through these senses, touch being an example, they learn about texture. They learn about the words that describe texture. And they're actually involved. It's 3-dimensional learning as opposed to just using one sense. Like talking to a child.
So get them up and moving, involved, touching things. And,
right.
Okay. And then nurturing connections. Talk about that.
And that, I encourage people to make connections as they're reading, for example. If they're reading a story about a farm, and you can connect it to a recent visit to a farm, or Uncle Joe who has a farm. Do you remember when we went out to his farm out in Efland? Or expand on whatever it is you're reading so that the child sees that it's part of a bigger picture.
And then the final tip you have is to encourage independence. I know that can be hard for some parents.
That can be very hard. And I mention this because what I'm seeing more of today is young parents are wonderful. They're wanting to do everything right for their little person. And sometimes in so doing, they want to orchestrate what it is they're doing. They want to play with them. They think that that's part of being a perfect parent is to be there and support them. When sometimes, in order to have a child learn what it's like to be self-resilient, needs to experience independence and bouncing back if things don't happen to go their way. And mom is a distance away and say, maybe you can take care of that, or figure a different way of working it out.
Right. Instead of mom intervening and trying to fix it.
Right.
That independence, or learning that independence and resiliency is important.
Schedules today for little people, even for middle school and upper school, are so scheduled that there's less and less time for play, independence, learning opportunities that aren't scheduled back to back.
Right, absolutely. We're going to take a break. We'll talk more in just a minute.
Okay, great.
We'll be back with more on early childhood development after these messages. Today we're taking a closer look at early childhood development, from those developmental milestones to resources for families who need additional support. And with us again is Carol Miedema with CWM Consulting, Early Childhood Assessment and Advocacy. Now before the break, we're giving some tips for parents, developmental tips and ways to encourage our children to develop in a timely manner. But there are times when some warning signs kind of raise their heads. And how would a parent know when there might be some issues developmentally?
Often a parent sees some behavior that might look atypical for their child, whether they have an older child or whether they have seen them with other friends, children they just have a sense that maybe things aren't proceeding the way they need to.
What are some examples of that?
Okay, and I would encourage them, parents, to be abreast of what is developmentally appropriate.
Okay.
At the Gazelle Institute, we have, and there are many other sources where you can find out what's appropriate for a 3-year-old,
Okay.
4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, and so on. Because sometimes we tend to think a child would be able to do something, and really they're not quite ready to do that. So the more a parent can know that this is within the range of typical behavior for this child, then we feel okay. Sometimes they might compare themselves with or use their friends as measuring sticks. And so-and-so's child is reading and the child is just 4. Gosh, my child isn't reading. Maybe there's something wrong with my child. Or comparing sometimes with your friends might not be the best thing to do, because you need to be in touch with your little person as well as what is the normal developmental sequence for a child that particular age.
Okay, and so that's important to have that conversation with your child's pediatrician and
Exactly.
and kind of learn a little bit more about what is age appropriate, developmentally appropriate.
Or they can just Google and find out. Google a 3-year-old child or a 4-year-old child, and often you will see what is appropriate in terms of language, what's appropriate in terms of toileting and that sort of physical development. There's a lot out there for parents to investigate and learn more about, just to get a ballpark of what's developmentally appropriate.
Okay, now you talked about the behavior and then the child comparisons. There's also feedback from the school that can help bring about problem awareness.
Right. A teacher might mention in a conference or pull a parent aside and say, I'm just wondering if there might be something going on that we need to know about, because what I'm seeing in Johnny is thus and so. Can you give me more information about that? That has opened the dialogue, whether it come from the teacher or the parent could be the one to say, this is the sort of behavior we're seeing at home. Are you seeing it at school? Is it something you should, or we should be concerned about?
Right.
Engage the teacher in this dialogue.
And also peer interactions, the way that they're interacting with other students, whether it's at school or at church or in the neighborhood, those are indicators as well?
Right. They could very well be indicators, but there again, you want to check into it more thoroughly before you tend to say, oh, my child has a diagnosable, oh, maybe he's autistic because he's this. Please, I really encourage parents to not get too excited about behaviors that they see. They might be quite typical of the age and not too alarming. Get more information from the people with whom the child interacts on a daily basis.
I think you brought up a great point, because a lot of times as parents, including myself, we can get anxious when we see different behaviors or get some feedback from the school and are concerned about our child's progress. So like you said, reaching out and just getting more information is very important. Because then when you talk about your child's development, having those pieces in place becomes even more important as well. Is that right?
Exactly.
So when you think about what is appropriate and you try to help parents figure out how to find out more information, what's the first step or the first piece of advice that you share?
Okay. I like to work with the child. I like to observe the child in a group setting. I like to see how he interacts with peers, how he interacts with the teacher, following directions, that sort of information. Observation is just really key as to see what might be atypical. And then what I do in my practice is I do a developmental screening in order to really get a sense of where is this child.
How can people find out more information and get connected with you?
I do not have a website yet. They can reach me by telephone, and I believe we've put it up on the screen. Thank you. I may be with a client and not available at the time of the call, but please, please, please leave a message and I will get back with you within 12 hours.
Okay, and that number is 919-847-0390. They can also reach you via email at cwmiedema@gmail.com.
Excellent,
certainly
yes.
get some more information and maybe an assessment. We're going to take another break and we'll talk more in just a minute.
Okay.
Don't go away. Tar Heel Talk will continue after these messages. Welcome back to Tar Heel Talk. I'm Sonia Williams. Today's show focuses on early childhood development and resources for children and families. And with us again is Carol Miedema with CWM Consulting, Early Childhood Assessment and Advocacy. Now, Carol, throughout the show you have talked about child development and the importance of parents engaging in that very early on. You are a child development specialist and an advocate for parents and students in the classroom and in schools. Talk a little bit about when you might need an educational consultant to help.
Okay, sometimes the examples that we just talked about, if a child's behavior or learning is atypical or concern from the parent point of view, the teacher point of view, what probably you first want to do is check in with your pediatrician to explain what your concern might be and ask for recommendations. There are lots of options there. If the child has a language issue, a speech issue, possibly a speech therapist would be investigated. Or if a child is having motoric difficulties, fine or gross motor difficulties, bumping into things or that sort of thing, the teacher might recommend an occupational therapist. Or a child psychologist. If there's some issues that seem to be pretty evident in the classroom and in the family, the parent and the teacher might recommend a child psychologist who would do some testing and counseling too. You might want to take advantage in the school, if the school has a counselor, to talk with a counselor, to talk with a learning disability specialist if there is one there, if you're concerned about learning and the pace at which the child is learning in comparison to others. Or what I do is I'm looking predominantly at the whole child. I'm doing a developmental assessment. It's an observation that gives a look at how the child's eyes and hands work together with concrete manipulatives, how the eyes, hands work together with the brain to do fine motor tasks, gross motor tasks, language, both receptive, how much of the world the child knows in English, as well as receptive. I mean, receptive is how much of the child understands. But the expressive piece is really important too, because there are children who might understand vocabulary and understand language, but in order to produce it, might not be there. There might be a disconnect. And then I do a math assessment, and all the tools that I use are standardized, and I'm able to find where is this child according to development compared to his chronological age. There are some children who are developing along a continuum that is good and the way we would anticipate it to be. But it's at a little bit slower pace. Sometimes you hear that children might be recommended for another year in pre-K or K to give them another chance to develop those skills that would be necessary to move forward. Because development, how the child is in the classroom, is all developmental. No matter how smart a child is, the cognitive piece, all the other parts of this little being need to be working together in order to access that intellect.
And I think that's something that's important for parents to remember. I know working in an educational environment, you hear a lot of families come in with 4-year-olds and say that they're brilliant, but they might not be ready developmentally for an academic preschool.
Right, right.
So.
And what we want to do, and so part of what I do is explain to the family the results of what I find and give examples of what the child needs. It may not be going to kindergarten, your example. It may be in pre-K, another year. But there would be specific skills, specific areas that I would recommend that emphasis be placed, not only in the school setting, but at home. And I have had very good staffings with families who have wanted me to help interface their concern for their child with the classroom teacher. And that has worked out very well because we can form a partnership, consultant, teacher, parent, for the benefit of the child.
Right. How can people find out more information and get connected with you?
Either the email cwmiedema@gmail.com, send me an email and I will respond to that person and we can talk on the telephone. Or they can leave a message on my telephone, which is 919-847-0390.
And talking is the very first step.
Talking is the very first step. What I have done in my consulting is the first step is I hear from the parent what the concern is, and we talk about that. And then I want to know what the parent really is seeking so that I can then explain what pieces I might be able to provide.
Absolutely.
And then we set up a time if they're interested in having me screen the little person. And every time I screen a child, they're just as happy as can be. It's a very comfortable, not a test-like setting at all.
And you screen children from which age range?
Generally from age 3 to 10.
Okay.
That's how I've narrowed it most specifically now. The early years are just so very important. That's where I want to place my emphasis.
Absolutely. We have about a minute left in the program. Any final advice for us parents out there who are just nervous about our little ones and helping them stay on the right track?
Well, I've discovered a new book that was written in 2017 that is kind of my new best friend. I haven't gotten only halfway through, but it's excellent.
And it's called Raising a Secure Child.
Raising a Secure Child. And it's written by a group of psychologists who are part of the Circle of Security. It is excellent, and I could highly recommend it to anyone. It talks about what we do at the very beginning, attachment to the caregiver, that is has lifelong effect to us.
Well, Carol Miedema, thank you so much for coming and sharing your wealth of knowledge with us today.
Thank you.
All right. That's it for this week's Tar Heel Talk. To comment on this or other episodes of the show, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, or send an email to tarheeltalk@fox50.com. I'm Sonia Williams. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again next week.